Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Freedom Affairs. We are here today. My name is Timothy Swantstrom-Stage, as water. And we're here with Freedom Affairs to interview Richard Campagna, who was the 2004 Vice President candidate for the Libertarian Party. And we'd like to go into introducing Richard Campagna and going into a little bit more about what he has in store for us. I'd like to also introduce the bio that we have on the back of his new book, To Play Along the Path, as well as the existential optimist. We'll start by reading the Richard Campagna's bio here. Richard Campagna and his team of optimistic, pragmatic, spiritual, existentialist merrymakers have done it again. The author set forth a low-key, workable philosophy of life, replete with do's and don'ts. Drawing from traditional existential philosophy, pop psychology, where 60s and 70s and novel practical approaches, as well as personal, professional, and political counsel developed for the new millennium. Campagna currently tours the country and the world, giving seminars and speeches on existentialism and providing personal, professional, and college career business counsel. He is currently working on his novel for the next book, Beyond Ideology, The Genesis of an Existential Libertarian. Richard Campagna is a multidisciplinary professional and existential thinker and practitioner who has dedicated most of his adult life to developing an optimistic, pragmatic, existential philosophy. An attorney, college professor, psychological counselor, and linguist, Campagna ran for Vice President of the United States as a Libertarian nominee in 2004. Now, getting into a little bit more, Richard Campagna has a wife of 34 years, one and only wife, right?
That's true.
Yeah, and has a son who is a Hollywood producer. We're going to talk about three things primarily today. Ultimately, the first topic being existential optimism, what it is and how we can understand it better. And the second would be the actual Libertarian Party. And then thirdly, judicial realism, how we can understand that more and how we can better look into the different viewpoints to help better our understanding.
Well,
so,
and the only thing I would say is with respect to the Libertarian Party, I would plan to talk more about libertarianism and the general movement and liberty themes as opposed to the specific party itself.
Right.
I think I can probably characterize better the liberty movement, broadly speaking.
Okay. Good. Well, as far as this existential optimism is concerned, maybe just to start off with that, how would you better explain that to maybe someone that doesn't have a complete understanding of it, or how can we better understand it?
Perfect. That's really my passion, this sort of broad-based existential philosophy, which I guess I have been trained in from a variety of schools, colleges, universities, and really by my own life's path. So if I had to characterize it, I would say it is a philosophy and approach to life which really emphasizes personal responsibility, being oneself, being intellectually honest with oneself and others and all of humanity, and in and of itself, just with that brief introduction, what could be more optimistic than that? To me, if you could achieve those 3 or 4 things, then I can't think of a more optimistic way to really conduct a life. And traditionally, this existential philosophy, coming and emanating firstly from Europe and then eventually spreading to the US and elsewhere, was sort of a mixed bag. It was both optimistic and pessimistic, depending upon which philosopher was describing it. And my point was, I don't like the pessimistic side of this, the sort of atheistic and pessimistic side of it. There seems to be an existential approach which has most of these personal responsibility themes, but which also incorporates optimism and God, for lack of a better term, or at least spirituality, in whatever way the individual practitioner wanted to carry it out. But the idea would be that there's nothing atheistic or non-atheistic about existentialism. It's just a way of being and an approach embodying honesty, and if one has a religious or spiritual belief or not, existentialism is not affected by that. So my point is, we have existential atheists, Jewish existentialists, Catholic existentialists, Christian existentialists, Buddhist existentialists, and every type of existentialist. And that, in a way, I also find brings people a great deal of optimism, because they can or cannot accept or reject their traditional faith and yet also engage in this lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And so it's true what you read from the blurb of the book. I kind of discovered this philosophy when I was a young man, 16 or 17 years of age, and was able to sort of work on it in college and in law school and in graduate school and in my life and marriage and jobs, and have literally felt that by getting the big picture of existential reality correct, all of the little details of life really made more sense to me, and I could make better decisions, and the decisions would, if you will, come out right, or at least right for me, hopefully right for other people. And so not only did I, in my own view, have a happy, healthy, successful life so far, but I feel compelled to run around the country and the world sharing this attitude or approach with people who I believe already have it. I actually believe it's not proselytizing or preaching. I'm just kind of explaining the human condition as I see it. And I think it's best described by a kind of existential optimism.
Sort of a practical example of how the self can benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Use it for yourself and understand.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. It really is just a way to reshuffle life's cards every day, almost reshuffle the deck every day, with no prearranged or preordained packages as to how to conduct life. And people might have goals, objectives, certainly. It's not a chaotic, anarchistic approach.
Right.
I mean, existentialists, like everybody, have goals and life streams and plans. The point is, don't pre-program yourself to think that today's objective is the only objective, and one result from that objective is exactly how it's supposed to go. Rather, go with the flow, analyze, decide, prioritize, re-objectify, and just keep life as an ongoing process, not a beginning or an end. You don't know what you're going to be or what your life is going to be until you've lived it. There's not some preordained formula, in advance. Yeah. And I guess what I would say is, the more I go around the world, the more I speak with people, the more I realize that many and most people kind of see life this way as we further talk about it.
Right. And I can ascertain from that you find that practical example to be something that's not putting out things from understanding, just kind of allowing things to be understood the way that you can interpret it, so you can go through your life. Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting approach, and I don't think that's very, maybe even commonly widely accepted.
No, it's not widely accepted. In other words, I sort of do informal studies and analyses of of most people, and I would argue that maybe 1 or 2% of the world, Americans and otherwise, really, if you ask them before we have our conversations, do they see themselves as existential thinkers or analyzers? The vast majority say no.
Sure,
They like
right,
some prepackaged lifestyle as to what is going to give them success, familially, professionally.
I can graph it, I can understand it.
I know where I'm supposed to be in 5 years, 10 years, and
it's my plan, right?
That's my
That's the plan,
plan.
right?
And it's reinforced by the non-existential approach is reinforced by the media on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
And the thing that gets me about existential thought, or the lack thereof, is when we have on the news these talking heads who are asked to give 3 things or 5 things that you have to do to weather the recession, or pick a candidate, or picking a spouse, or getting a date. And when I hear that,
Get hooked up for you.
I go nuts. In other words, it's like, 5 things you need to do to marry a millionaire.
Oh yeah.
5 things you need to know to be good with the ladies.
How are you going to win your ticket?
It's
Right.
horrible, and that will tell you essentially the opposite of an existential approach. Don't come up.
Right.
Don't tell me 5 things to do to find a spouse.
Right.
That's not existential.
Right. So getting that into the next topic, being libertarianism, how would that apply, or how would we actually, seeing the libertarianism,
Or bring the two together.
bring them together? I mean,
Yeah.
how does that?
Well, in getting into libertarianism in general, how it relates to existentialism, I can probably draw on my sort of biographical path, because that really led me to this road. And so I'll take you through it as quickly and as best as I can to make the point. I was very happy with my existential philosophy. It had given me really a great deal of enjoyment in life. I felt that I was living it exactly the way I wanted to, and the way, I was intended to. And it seemed to be also working well with my family, my wife, my colleagues. And so I said, okay, this is great. And leading up to that, I had come from a very political family. My parents were, each in their own way, Democratic Party leaders and Republican political appointees and leaders.
Oh, that's
So, and
amazing.
in New York City, and I must say, I was not that thrilled with what I saw in terms of each of those political parties and their mode of doing business and living, their lives and just managing the political system. And I think ultimately my parents were not that thrilled with it either.
okay. Not very satisfying.
Not very satisfying. They were into it for many years, but they're both deceased. But before they passed away, I got the impression that they were not, giving resounding endorsements of the Democratic philosophy and party politics as usual, nor the Republicans particularly.
So you kind of took it for yourself. Neither was really for you.
So I kind of took it for myself. Neither was really for me, and said, I don't even want to get involved in politics anymore, even though I've been around it all of my life and seem to be pretty good at it. I would develop my personal philosophy and be done with it.
Sure.
And I did do that, and for other reasons we moved from New York City to Iowa in roughly 1989. And at that moment in time, I was done with politics, but having a wonderful time raising my family and being myself and living and preaching existential optimism, writing books and giving talks. And then out of nowhere, into Iowa City, came a gentleman by the name of Clyde Cleveland.
Okay.
He is, I'm told, a distant relative of our former president, Grover Cleveland.
Grover, okay.
And he came in there announcing his campaign for governor and explaining his brand of libertarianism, which was a sort of a bottom-up approach to government, whereby the less government that we can have to solve particular problems is the best government, and on top of that, that the best government, when we do have and need government, the levels of government that are supposed to be doing things are the ones closest to the individual. So by that he meant, go to the individual first, then if you must, your family, your loose association of friends, and then if true government was required, local government, municipal government, state government, and then only for the really big things, national government and international government. We'll deal with that another time. But let's go to the U.S. So his approach made a great deal of sense to me, and made a great deal of sense to me particularly because it was very consistent with my humanistic, existential, spiritual, individual approach to life. So that being said, he made the next point, which was, and by the way, this approach to government that I just brought up is exactly what the founding fathers, the founders of our Constitution, put together, and he further made the point, which I knew, but it hadn't really dawned on me until he said it, that of course our Constitution set forth exactly that approach because the founders studied all sorts of governments before they founded America, and essentially found that this approach, small government, bottom-up government, was the best, they thought, and therefore they put in the Constitution what they thought was the best for the human spirit.
So very much a libertarian approach.
Which is exactly what libertarian is, that bottom-up form of government in the form of a constitutional republic, just as you've heard it, just as the Constitution set it forth.
Fantastic.
So Cleveland said, okay, this is my approach. If it makes sense to you, by the way, you seem like an open, honest, straightforward individual. How about being my running mate? Literally in 1 or 2 meetings, run with me for lieutenant governor of Iowa.
Right. Okay.
And having abandoned politics, or let it go, I said, wow, I finally have a path, I have a political philosophy and approach which is consistent with my existential optimism. Now I can put the two together, and I now have my existentialism, and I now have libertarianism, and I can both be myself and be involved in public service, and the two will work beautifully together.
That's a very good description. Which would lead us into basically the third subtopic, I guess, which would be the judicial realism. And how would that all apply? And put it all together.
And put it all together. Okay, now it's not that easy, but I think I'm up to the task.
Okay.
The idea of judicial realism, which is sort of a third approach or doctrine or theory by which I have tried to conduct my own life, is a little more limited than the other two, but since the importance of the law is apparently mushrooming these days in terms of all of our lives, it's sort of a transitional force between personal and political. And because I am a long-time trained and practicing attorney myself,
35 years.
literally 35 years, and have always had that was my first profession, which I studied first and particularly enjoyed. I particularly, by the way, enjoyed my legal training. But I would say that the best part of my legal training was when my professors said, let's take a breather from memorizing hundreds and hundreds of cases, which is the training of a lawyer. You basically, in our common law system, you learn hundreds of cases.
This decision based on the past. Okay.
On the past, and then you sort of put them together, applying those decisions to facts as they present themselves, and come up with a holding.
Okay.
One of my professors, and I should credit him, I remember the name of Edward Fagan, was the gentleman who taught me legal philosophy. I did take an elective course in law school. It wasn't a requirement. I was one of the few who took it.
Okay.
And he went through the different approaches or philosophies of law, and the one that resonated most with me was something called legal realism or judicial realism. Similar terms. It's a philosophy which basically says all of these cases that we're memorizing and reading and briefing and comparing are good. And obviously you can't be a lawyer without them. You need to know your cases, you need to know the law, understand how precedent works in terms of judges deciding cases. And you need to be a good fact gatherer and ask the right questions to apply facts to law. He said, but to be quite honest, the most important thing you can do is understand that unless you have a total incompetent as a lawyer, which is, I like to think it's rare, let's just presume that in each and every case, there are two lawyers doing their work, getting the facts, knowing the law, and presenting their cases. So says legal realism or judicial realism. The way that the judges or juries decide those cases, the so-called triers of the fact, is not necessarily scientific. It's not necessarily that they're going to take the best argument or the most thoroughly researched argument, but rather, as long as they have two sides to hang their hat or cap on in terms of deciding, they will more likely decide the case based upon their inherent gut feeling of justice, or how they think it should come out, or in accordance with their philosophy or psychology, or jokingly some of the writers say, or what they had for breakfast that day, or whether they got up on the wrong side of the bed, or had a fight with their partner the night before.
Which contributed to that decision now, rather than a moral...
That's right, rather than a legalistic, mechanistic, what they call positivistic approach.
Okay.
And I said, that does make a good deal of sense to me. Just because of my understanding of the human condition, the existential nature of the human condition leads me to believe that that is the way people, and judges are people too,
certainly
act and operate. And then it also made more sense to me because I just looked at some of these decisions. And a lot of them were not all that rational, not always based on the best, rational legal arguments, but rather they seemed to be decided based upon judicial realism rather than science or anything else. So that really resonated with me, and in all of my legal work, when trying cases, and I don't do that many sort of trying or that much trying of cases, but just in advising and analyzing people and teaching the law, I have always incorporated judicial realism into my teaching and into my legal advising, because I'm convinced that it basically gets to the internal inherent basis of human nature, the way people act personally, translates into the legal, and it translates into the political. And so somehow I came all the way around and have, for much of my adult life, literally since I'm 17 or 18, integrated existentialism, existential optimism, judicial realism, and a libertarian political approach into it.
Puts it all together.
And that puts
very
it all
nicely,
together.
yes,
and
yes.
that's what I've tried to do in this particular book.
Wonderful.
To play along the path.
And it is a very good book. I've read it, and it's a collection of sorts, and it's very interesting. The optimistic existentialist being the one that was the beginning is very interesting as well. And I definitely appreciate you coming by. We thank the viewers for sharing some time with us today to get to know Richard Campagna, and you certainly can get further onto the different information that he has expressed with the books. And we thank you for your time, and I want to say thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I always enjoy, as you can see, I'm very enthusiastic about all of these themes, and as long as I'm kicking, I'm going to keep talking about it.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good day.